Hello and welcome to the Blytheway Mining Show on Core London TV. I'm Bonnie Hughes, Business Development Manager for Royal Haskoning Mining Group. Our very exciting guest today is Mikhail Nikomarov. He is the founder and CEO of Bushveld Energy. Bushveld is 84% owned by Bushveld Minerals, and the company was created to support and adopt the use of vanadium redox flow batteries. Mikhail, thank you very much for joining us. And wow, that is a lot of insight and foresight to pick that segment of the market. What inspired you to start Bushveld Energy?
Well, thank you very much for having me here. Look, it wasn't just one thing. I'd been working on the continent of Africa for quite a while before then, so my passion was always about trying to maybe solve the challenges in terms of electricity access on the continent, which still persists. And so the question was, how can one do it? And that's when I started talking to the CEO of Bushveld Minerals, Fortune Machapello, about the use of vanadium in energy storage. And we actually spent some time doing some analysis, as we often do, to see whether or not there was an opportunity, both whether energy storage was going to be part of the future. And this was in 2014, when it wasn't quite clear whether energy storage would become the next big thing, as it is actually emerging right now. And then the other question was whether or not the technology would actually play a large enough role. And when we did that, it was actually quite an exciting opportunity. People call it a hockey stick. That's what we forecast. And in the last few years, it's actually been that way in terms of demand for energy storage. It's really become kind of the hot subsector in power after renewables. And so in hindsight, it was a fairly intelligent decision, but at the time it was quite a bit risky as well.
Well, considering Germany has had so many problems with the fact that they decided to go much more renewable, but the problem is that renewable energy is not consistent. Therefore, a need for a storage battery is definitely warranted. But at the same time, there's been a lot of talk about lithium-ion batteries as well. So what is the sort of difference, pros and cons between the lithium and the vanadium?
Well, so the technical performance is different. So there's, vanadium redox flow battery, it's a long life battery. It lasts for 20 years versus, let's say, 5 or 7 years for higher end lithium batteries. So if you think about a power system, usually that's planned for 20 years at a time. Transmission lines last for 20 years. Substations last for 20 years. So even PV and wind generators are usually 25-year assets. So there's a nice match between vanadium and kind of the power system versus lithium. Other things around the degradation. The reason why lithium battery doesn't last that long is because it degrades. Every single use means the battery performs just a little bit worse the next time. Think about the phones that you have, right? A lot of times the phone still works, the battery's life has kind of died out. Same thing with our car batteries, which use lead acid. So those are the challenges of what we call solid-state batteries. The flow battery doesn't have that issue, and that's why it can last longer. It doesn't degrade from performance, and it's also really good for what we call energy uses. So you can think of power, like in a car, that's your engine. It creates power, the horsepower, the torque. But you also have the gas tank, which tells you how far can the car go on that same kind of engine, that same horsepower. And so vanadium flow battery, we can change those two independently. So you could have a more powerful engine or a bigger gas tank. You can't do that with lithium. You can't do that with lead acid. So when you need that large gas tank, that multiple hours per day, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours of storage, this is where a vanadium redox flow battery becomes a lot more cheaper. So not just technically superior, but also cheaper.
And so I understand that you're also looking to manufacture the batteries in South Africa as well, and that's your plan going forward?
Well, look, our objective is to have South Africa play a key role in the global supply chain, right? This is never about, we want to have 100% localization in South Africa, because there's always going to be components that are cheaper to make somewhere, whether it's in the UK or in China or in the United States or in South Africa. And we certainly think that there are some components that we can make a lot more cost effectively in South Africa, the big one being the vanadium electrolyte. We already have the vanadium in South Africa, so our goal is to process that into electrolyte, which is the thing that stores the energy in the battery. And so we can make that there. Certainly for some domestic uses, we may actually want to do some assembly as well, again, to add more value. But the good thing about the electrolyte is we can export that. You can't make it anywhere, because if there's no vanadium, you can't make the electrolyte. So in Nigeria, Spain may not be as natural a place for vanadium electrolyte manufacturing as South Africa is.
And I guess you will have access to your own sources of vanadium through Bushveld Minerals.
Absolutely. So the concept has always been to create a large, integrated, low-cost vanadium platform, and that really what Bushveld Minerals is. The integration is the ability to take that vanadium molecule all the way from when it's in the ground, process it, beneficiate or to produce a value-add product like ferrovanadium, or what we actually produce as nitrovan at our Vametco mine and processing facility, but also other products such as electrolyte. But then we can take it further and actually make a battery around that. And we can install that battery, we can develop that project, and we can create financing around that. All of those activities, from when the electrolyte is created, that's something that Bushveld Energy can do. And the amount of value we can create that way is much more, which is good for our shareholders, but I think also good for the continent of Africa, which is our focus on the batteries, because that's, again, that ability to solve some of the energy access challenges, and also the electricity cost challenges that still exist today.
And I understand you're working very closely with Escom, the energy provider in South Africa right now.
So we announced last year our first project, which is indeed with Escom, and they have quite a bit of a need for storage. It's just a way to make the power system more efficient. South Africa's got what we call a radial grid. It looks kind of like a fishbone. So you've got these nodes that very long power lines, and it's just more efficient to put batteries at the end of those, for example, than double the size of the power lines, or to try to encircle the fish in skin, shall we say. So that's why there's an interest on the part of Escom, and certainly the technical benefits that I described, the long duration and the long life of the battery. So yes, we've got a project with them. We hope to have that system installed by the end of the second quarter this year, and hopefully it'll kind of open up the opportunities more in the country, not just with Escom, but I think with other users. There's an element of kind of touching and seeing the technology. It's still relatively new for a lot of people, especially in South Africa. Well, it's huge in China and kind of a lot more developed and well-known in Germany, the United Kingdom, the US. I think in South Africa, we're kind of in early stages of that knowledge about storage.
And so would China be in a more advanced stage? Because I know that they just adopted a project in Delhi in China. They just installed, it was at 800 megawatts or something. Yeah,
I think that project's still in process. It was a two-phase project. So I think the first one was going to be 400 megawatt hours, and the second phase of similar size. But that's China, right? They basically build these things as buildings, and it's quite impressive. But that's something that few markets can afford because of just their size, right? South Africa is a much smaller market. It may not make sense to build things of that size, but absolutely, the Chinese government has an overt policy of supporting the vanadium redox flow battery. That system that you've mentioned by Ronke Power in Dalian is just one example. There's another one going up, which is 100 megawatts, 500 megawatt hours in the Hubei province by Penang. So it's not just a one-off thing. It's really a policy-driven effort, but also a technology-driven effort in China.
And I can see that, as with any technology, as it progresses, the cost per kilowatt hour starts to decline, which is very good and makes it much easier, more for the consumer. But right now, at this point, the sort of larger storage batteries are much more cost-efficient. Is that correct?
I mean, there's a little bit of benefit to scale, but really, there's some benefits to the smaller ones as well. So the solutions that we kind of support, they're containerized. So there's less time for engineering, environmental, a lot less work that's done on site. The system is built in a factory, a controlled environment. It's not quite clear whether those types of configurations or much larger ones, which is like a building, will win out. There's a lot of benefits to having smaller systems, and you have more of them, and you can control them almost virtually through control systems that are managed centrally, even though the physical battery itself is spread out. Or to have it more centralized. I think this is one of the interesting things about how the power grid will evolve. certainly my own view is that we'll have more decentralization, the kind of proliferation of solar panels, and the cost reduction there is also allowing it. We don't need as much transmission wire because we can generate and store and use, at the very end of the transmission line, sometimes even in homes. So it may, there is certainly at the moment a cost savings when you have something larger, but I think it's really just the nature of the companies who have developed those projects, and I think just the size of the Chinese market where, unless you do it at hundreds of megawatts, nobody's going to take any notice. So that might also be at play here.
In a perfect world, then countries would be able to share their storage electricity, but I mean, that won't necessarily happen. So what is the next steps right now for Bushveld Energy?
So a number of next steps. Obviously, we need to get that project with Escom, get that system operational, and allow Escom to actually run various protocols to see how it works, whether it matches their expectations. I think that will grow the sector in South Africa and certainly grow the opportunity for what we're trying to do as Bushveld Energy. The second thing is we're fairly advanced on actually the manufacturing side. So we'd like to break ground later this year, first take an investment decision on the electrolyte plant itself. I'd love to have it up and running at some point next year so that when there are kind of larger orders, we can actually make the electrolyte in South Africa. So I think that's important. And, part of this conversation, we need to get the word out. We need to increase the awareness of the technology because it is already commercially deployed. There's multiple companies that are already deploying it. We were just talking before this about a new company that's kind of entering the manufacturing side. So that's quite exciting, but really right now the story tends to be lithium, lithium, lithium. And in some cases that makes sense. But as soon as you're getting to 4-hour storage, people really should be thinking about, is there a more cost-effective way to store that energy? And that's where the vanadium redox flow battery comes in.
All right, I have just one last question for you.
Okay.
Are you eventually going to go public so that shareholders could potentially participate in the growth of your future?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I'd love to be in a position where, where we've created enough value for that to make sense. And maybe then I'll come back and we can have that discussion again.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing everything that goes on with your company and the progression and the growth. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Blythe Way Morning Show.